Days Gone kicks off relatively simply. You play as a biker riding through an open-world zombie post-apocalypse, seeking answers around his dead wife and smashing enemies in the face. Sometimes there are spectacular hordes of them. So far, so straightforward. Yet, during its 60-odd-hour ride, Days Gone loses its focus with repetitive missions, a thematically unsatisfying storyline, and an excess of bugs and busywork. These issues combine with a dreary, uninteresting world to add up to an uneven and mostly toothless zombie game. You know, for a gruff biker dude traveling through a version of Oregon that's crawling with zombies... fine, freakers. Anyway, Deacon St. John is actually an endearingly charming and sweet-natured protagonist, aside from those moments where he inexplicably yells during stealth missions. His bike is your constant companion, and it handles well and feels great to ride, especially after you bolt on some damage-absorbing upgrades and nitrous. For a game that's so centered on riding, it was essential that developer Sony Bend nail that fundamental mechanic. Sadly, Deacon's charisma and bitchin' bike aren't enough to carry the story, which Days Gone insists on telling largely through tedious, barely interactive flashbacks of him and his wife. The dialogue's pretty bad.
But only if you promise to ride me as much as you ride your bike.
But for the first half at least, the storyline forms a consistent emotional through-line and motivation for Deacon. However, it loses that direction in the second, which never gives us a reason to care about these new characters. It doesn't help that Days Gone takes itself almost religiously seriously. At least, there are some enjoyable supporting characters. Deacon's primary relationship with his best buddy Boozer is heartfelt, and there's also some flavour to the world weariness of the older survivors. The human antagonists, on the other hand, are as interesting as cardboard cutouts. They're virtually all roughly sketched bad guys who are bad for bad's sake. Days Gone's world certainly needs all the character it can get. While it's pretty enough at a glance, if you look closer it's also relatively sparse, with little world building or environmental storytelling to differentiate one area from another, and not a lot of surprises to be found in its sprawling landmass. This was a world that was once lived in, we're told, but its uninspired interiors and barren exteriors certainly don't feel like it. Fighting bad guys is fun enough though. Human marauders and feral jerks called Rippers give you a good opportunity to play with an assortment of guns and crossbows, and there's a lot of satisfaction to be gained by clearing out clusters of enemies with giant napalm molotovs. Deacon can also unlock a slow-mo ability early on, which makes no sense for a biker, but it allows you to relieve the pressure for a moment if you get overwhelmed. Melee, in particular, is a weighty and bloody blast. Every hit feels like it really connects, and I found myself more invested in crafting the right bashing weapon from found objects than I was in finding one to shoot. Stealth is less fun just because it's so forgiving. There's plenty of cover and the enemies are so spread out they're easy to pick off one by one. I found compulsory stealth-only story missions the least welcome variety in Days Gone. To unlock much of its central mystery, Deacon has to eavesdrop on NPCs explaining world lore several times over without being seen, which is not particularly compelling. Of course, Days Gone's humans aren't the only threat. Its world is peppered with freakers who come in a range of sizes and speeds, but you'll mostly encounter the garden variety that can be swiftly dealt with if split from a pack. Hordes, however, are a different story. Just look at that! It's Sony Bend's greatest technical achievement, and every single encounter with these 100-strong, writhing masses was a thrilling sprint for survival. Even with strong combat, things get boring after a while because Days Gone's missions suffer from repetition across the board. As Deacon explores Oregon, he stumbles across a number of survivor camps, each of which has a to-do list of very samey jobs you have to do in order to unlock new weapons and bike upgrades. This makes up literally dozens upon dozens of hours of play. This problem extends to the plentiful missions found in the world as well, and too much time is spent scouting the area to find a gas tank, to fill a generator, or occasionally replace a busted fuse over and over and over and over. Further, there are lots of freaker nests to clear out so you can fast travel, but while they're satisfying at first, eventually the sheer number of them and lack of variety from nest to nest made me lose interest. All that repetition is exacerbated by the fragility of your bike. This thing gets banged up from contact with just about any object, including, sadly, freakers. Why take this joy away from me? While I don't mind the sense of vulnerability, it becomes a drag when you simply want to get from A to B to complete a task without the fuss of uncompromising physics. And what kind of biker drives around super carefully anyway? There are also notable frame rate dips while playing on a PS4 Pro at 1080p, and constant instances of pop-in. More, I've heard a number of audio issues that range from complete dialogue dropouts to audio syncing problems. It's nothing game-breaking, but it was a constant reminder that things aren't as smooth as they should be. Days Gone ultimately feels bloated, like a movie that goes on for an hour longer than it needs to or should have. There's definitely a good game in here somewhere. You can feel it in the crunchy combat and when running from an enormous freaker horde. Some fine-tuning and editing could have removed the tedium and highlighted what makes this game unique and interesting, but Days Gone rides strictly down the middle of the dusty road and never finds its rhythm. For more on Days Gone, check out the first 17 minutes and 6 deadly threats you'll face. And for everything else, stick with IGN.
Introducing the all-new Up-It News!
Don't touch it. What's wrong with you? Get corn snack. Game sucks. Bring it back.
Up-It Noon returns to IGN.com and YouTube this April.